I want to introduce you to a very good friend of mine, excellent scholar in the Bible, very serious about being a Christian. So serious that he tries to give it away to everybody, almost to the point of being a nuisance. But he's got such a great, dynamic personality. When he's giving it away, everybody's just smiling and say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. He has filled himself up with Chuck's teaching, with the Bible, and he gives it away. The only thing I would say is a big disadvantage is that today, not as a disadvantage that he is one, but that he teaches in our school system, which limits his ability to share Jesus Christ during that daytime. And so I'd like for you to give a warm welcome to a good friend of mine, Chris Corlett.
Thank you, brother. Praise the Lord. It's a great privilege to be here. I appreciate Lewis's introduction. I served KI and its membership as a deputy provost in New York State, and in March, Dr. Missler and Lewis traveled to New York, and it's where he really first heard some of the things that I have to say and some of the things that I like to talk about. And in the last 6 months, we forged a relationship and a friendship that goes far beyond just a one-time meeting or the casual relationships that you can have. KI allows us to do that. I want to correct one thing that Lewis said. I'm not currently teaching in public schools. An over 2-decade career as a teacher, but I'm very passionate about education, and not the least of which is my wife of 28 years and I have a 10-year-old daughter. And we'll talk more about that as we move along. As I pondered on the title for this message, I wanted to come up with something that I hope you go, wow, I wonder what that means. This is a Strategic Perspectives Conference. As Lewis just said, Koinonia Institute is an online college. And along with my passion for the Bible and my Lord and Savior Jesus, education is really what Trevor was saying, to teach. This is so foundational in everything we're doing. What did Jesus do? He taught. So I see education much broader than what you often might read about as a headline or even what you might remember as a student. In fact, what I like to do is consider education to be the everyman strategic perspective. You don't have to have a subscription to some military website. There's no intel that I can give you that you can't find for yourself. Everything's on the internet. There's no secrets being held. We're all very familiar with it. We're very familiar with the language, and we're very familiar with the tempo and just how this thing works out. In fact, I sort of divide this everyman strategic perspective called education in 4 domains. God has given a strong commission to parents, hasn't he? And we, as parents, take that very seriously. Trevor, who was up here before, one shy of a dozen kids. He teaches in the public schools, and you heard the devotion he has to his family. I chose to make a professional commitment. I'll talk a little bit about that. But I also want to point out that many of you have made a commitment to education. How many have been Sunday school teachers? Homeschoolers? How many helped kids with homework wherever they went to school? How many have shared the gospel? We're educators. You are educators. Then we get to personal choices, and many of us have had to be confronted with some significant choices in how to educate our children. And then I want to end as it's really a political cause. And although you might read the occasional headline here and do a little head wag and a little tisk-tisk when you read some ridiculous thing on YouTube, watch something, whatever, there is a trend, a decades of trend of what's been happening with education. And I actually think it's a very bleak undercurrent that is worth treating as a strategic trend. I love Trevor's analogies with the fruit. Wasn't that great? Really provocative. And I just got thinking, KI follows so many trends. I was just imagining this fruit bowl, all these different fruits. And what I want to submit today is that there's another fruit that we put in that bowl, the everyman strategic perspective, called education. I'm telling you, there's nothing secret in this presentation. You know these verses. Train up a child in the way appropriate for him. All verses are taken from the International Standard Version. You can talk to Dr. Welty about that if you want to. Train a child in the way appropriate for him. And when I just didn't want him to be mad at me. So train a child in the way appropriate. And when he becomes older, he will not turn from it. Every parent, we say that every night. Paul said, the joy is to know that my son is in the faith. God forbid we settle for a comfortable life for our kids. God forbid we settle for an easy education for our kids. Better they go through hell now than go through hell then. Amen? Amen. This is important stuff. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the training and instruction them about the Lord. We have such a higher calling than teaching fractions. How many conversations have you been in where it's like, oh, did you see the ridiculous way to add numbers? We're going to take a look at that. Yes. But let's not lose focus on the prize. That's not the education that matters in eternity. Let's face it, as long as you can multiply by 7, you're good. Right? Amen? They're our legacy. I miss my parents, my dad. I miss my wife's mom. Trevor talked about the 3rd and 4th generation, right? I wish we could be that Ozzie and Harriet grandparents, right? Didn't you just wish you had that? One grandchild in our family. This is a legacy, a crown for the aged, pride of their parents. My daughter's 10, and I had a notion that my son, who's 23, Ruth and I have been married 28 years, as I said, and God saw fit to give us 2 children with 13 years in between. I always thought my son wanted to know his dad was proud of him. And my daughter wanted to know that her daddy loved her. I had that feeling. But I asked my daughter, and she says, you know, I know you love me. So it means a lot to me when you tell me you're proud of me. I thought that was really perceptive from a 10-year-old. The pride, they're a legacy. God intends for us to have a spear going through time, which is our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. The Shema. What an amazing passage. And you can't read that without feeling inadequate. I should take Lewis's and put it right there, right? You know, but as the phylacteries and the frontlets. There's a word used in the Greek. It literally means train up a child, educate, instruct. And I find it fascinating. I just give this is a little extra. When you endure what you endure disciplines you. God is treating you as sons. Is there a son whom the Father does not discipline? Elsewhere in Titus we read that it trains us to renounce ungodly living. What a powerful way to train up a child to renounce ungodly living and worldly passions. Actually, in talking about Jesus, it said, I will punish him and let him go. I was intrigued by that. These are not trivial words. These are big words. These are big ideas. But I know we take our parental commission seriously. I made a professional commitment as an educator. I felt in the 70s, as I was considering what career to pursue, that education served as an equalizer. All men are created equal. We have equal origins. But I believe education could go one step further and could create that equal opportunity. Maybe I heard that too early in my life. Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Well, that was kind of it. That was kind of it. If we can all fish, that was it. That's the idea. sad to see that over time that has now become, there's supposed to be some kind of equal outcome. So that we have programs to make sure everybody has a cell phone at taxpayers' expense. That's weird. And in fact, we've lost the idea that we're all men are created equal. Years ago, I think it was Chuck Colson, I forget. But he said it used to be that there was an equality of people and a hierarchy of ideas. That all men were created equal. But ideas, there were noble ideas and there were silly ideas. I think Twitter is a symptom, not a cause, but now if you can say something in 140 characters or less, you're published. Doesn't matter what you say. You say what you ate that night and everybody likes it, right? That has flipped, and now there's some hierarchy of humanity and who gets certain rights and doesn't get other rights and this and thing and whatever. But all the ideas are equal. There's no nobility in the public conversation anymore. And I think we've progressed to a time where we've lost equal origins, and it's not even about creating opportunities, it's insisting upon the same outcome. I was talking with, Trevor just said it. Do you really want everything to be fair? That's a great analogy. But not only as an equalizer, education was for me an opportunity to be evangelistic. You see, I actually found ways in the public high school to share my faith. We created a Bible club called 212. 2 wounds, 1 wound, 2 wounds. And we met regularly. The prayer at the pole or meet you at the pole, prayer events. We had 8 consecutive years of baccalaureates at my high school. Baccalaureate is a service for the graduating seniors. And to this day, I will get students reaching out on Facebook or whatever and say, you know what, we always knew you loved us and you loved Jesus. This educator could want nothing more. But you see, I was going to teach math. So that's logic. That's going to appeal to the mind. In fact, on my wall in my classroom, I had Pascal's wager. How many are familiar with Pascal's wager? I thought this group some would. The idea is essentially this. If I'm wrong about God, if I'm wrong about God, I really haven't lost that much. But if I'm right about God, I lose an awful lot by being wrong. Pascal was a famous mathematician. It seemed very appropriate in the classroom. But it created conversation. It created perspective. I've actually come not to like that because I don't want God to simply be the better of 2 alternatives. He is the best. He is the treasure that I seek. But nonetheless, it was a useful tool in my classroom to allow me to start a conversation that would ultimately lead to a conversation about Jesus. But logic alone doesn't get the job done. Some people can be reasoned into faith, but that doesn't even seem. But that old saying, nobody cares how much you know until they what? Know how much you care. It works in education. It works in so many venues. And so, along with a colleague of mine, I actually got the idea from him, we posted 1 Corinthians 13 on our wall. Yeah, a little pushback. But at the end of the day, even John Lennon said it, right? All we need is what? Love. Come on, this isn't just another way of saying it. And so this was my professional commitment. This idea of train people to fish, but also use that as a platform to let it become one of the fish caught so that they spend eternity with their Father in heaven. Personal choice. You got choice like you've never had before. Public schools, private schools, charter schools, these hybrids where there's some government money being used, but with some of the regulations taken away. Online schooling. Anybody doing much with online besides KI? But online schools, there's K12.com. There's a charter school that actually is online. It's in Pennsylvania. Homeschooling. And something called unschooling. Not sure if you're very familiar with it. It basically removes one of the key components of education. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. It doesn't have a formal curriculum. Once you get past personal choice, and this really isn't to tell you which one to do, that's not the point of this, it's to understand education as a strategic perspective, it's worth taking a look at political causes. The word education is actually derived from a Latin word which means to bring out, to lead forth. I always have found that fascinating as I reflect on that. Is it to lead out of ignorance to knowledge? To prepare people? Or is it to lead out of darkness into the light? I don't think there's an answer to that. I've actually tried to research that a little bit. They were called to be priests. I won't take Chuck's line, the only three that are both kings and priests. But education is a calling to educate, to lead forth, to lead out. I appreciate the quote that Dr. Missler makes of Benjamin Franklin, jack of all trades and master of one. That actually sounds like a college degree. You major in something, right? And then you learn a lot of other stuff. Of course, you can have minors. And I've often thought about what a great description that is of a college education. Teddy Roosevelt said a thorough knowledge of the Bible is worth more than a college education. In fact, Trevor, last night we were talking, and he said that in the early 1800s, they debated whether to teach anything but the Bible. Education ought to be a searchlight given to a man to explore everything, but very especially the things most distant from himself. Chesterton. Education is what remains after one's forgotten everything he learned in school. That's a challenge to a teacher because it's only what you send with your kids that matters. It's not what they never took in the first place, what they didn't get, it's what they did get. And as I was pondering this priesthood notion, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people to be his very own and proclaim the wonderful deeds of the one who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I think one of the big questions that we have as we consider education as a strategic perspective is what is the role of it? Is this to send people to college? In this day and age, that's going to make you a slave to the banks. In fact, I believe it's over $1 trillion now that is owed in federally guaranteed funds. It's one of the big, big debt bubbles and as some say, it's the next one. Is it to get a job? Well, maybe it is. You're sort of a slave to your boss. Colossians gives us some advice on that, we heard earlier. But there was a time when education really focused on being an informed and contributing citizen, where your only debt was to your brother. Ask.com says this: the liberal arts of those subjects or skills that in classical antiquity were considered essential for a free person, a citizen, to know in order to take an active part in civic life. In ancient Greece, this included participating in public debate, defending oneself in court, serving on juries, and most importantly, military service. The aim of these studies was to produce a virtuous, knowledgeable, articulate person. Can anybody say that that's the description of public education today? We've come a long way, baby, and it ain't good. Anybody familiar with the trivium? A couple of you are. The trivium is that classical, often identified as that classical education, where basically you learned grammar, logic, and rhetoric. In fact, I think it mirrors KI to some extent. Grammar is like the facts, and then logic is reasoning, and then rhetoric is your ability to engage. And somehow reminds me of the Berean, know Jesus, and then discern between what's right and wrong, Issachar, and then finally be an ambassador, be able to have a conversation. I don't want to spend too much time on that to make it away. And by the way, I'm going to give you an opportunity if you're interested in this. I'm moving quickly, there's a reason for that. But I am going to give you an opportunity to have a copy of this if you want. Received this in an email just this past weekend. I was reminded of you today when I was listening to Plato's Republic. In it, he was describing the education of the city soldiers who were supposed to be the most elite of the citizens and outlining the various subjects they would be learning. Interestingly enough, Socrates insisted the very first knowledge for a soldier should be mathematics, since he maintained that this art directs the mind away from the merely physical into higher truths. Remember that comment earlier about the hierarchy? Thereby leading the soul closer to God. In other words, math properly used can be a spiritual discipline. Actually, Mike resides in New York, and he received his silver medallion at the age of 18. I want to equip us this morning to be able to better dissect what's happening in the conversation. And so, as Michael Behe introduced irreducible complexity of the cell, I want to introduce the irreducible complexity of education. There's three things every educational system needs, and you don't necessarily need anything past this. Curriculum, what is the student going to learn? Pedagogy is the fancy word for how is a student going to learn it. And assessment, testing, did they learn it? KI has that. You know the curriculum. The pedagogy is an online, interactive, 24/7, every man experience. And assessment, of course, is the quizzes and the DQs and the finals. When we talk about curriculum, there's two things to be aware of, and this will help you wend your way through conversations about some of this Common Core stuff. It's declarative knowledge. Marzano is a fabulous educational researcher, and he says informational knowledge, declarative knowledge is developed through review, revision, error analysis, identification of similarities and difference. It's the facts. 2 + 2 is 4. This is a fact. When I was a student teacher, I used to say, don't argue with a fact. And I would try to make the fact that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. That was my fact. I always try to turn these things around. But facts are facts. You shouldn't have to argue with that. Procedural knowledge is that knowledge that's oriented towards skills, strategies, and processes. Over time, this knowledge is shaped by the learner. Not surprise anybody. There's things you got to know and things you got to do. Again, I'm not really giving you anything that's mind-shattering here. Some technical jargon, some perspective. It's the everyman strategic perspective. So this is one you might have seen on the internet. We got to subtract 470 minus 230, and most of us would take the classic, the traditional, the correct, we got the answer. You just line them up and subtract them. Works pretty well for a long time. As part of this thing called Common Core, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and we need to understand that not everybody's exposed to that. It's not in every state, and this is an international conference. What they actually expect you to do is to go to numbers that are more friendly, more user-friendly, more enjoyable to work with. And to be fair, multiples of 10, multiples of 100, they're a little easier to work with. And so they had to add 30 to the two numbers to convert it to an equivalent problem of 500 minus 260. And so the answer is 240. The problem is the traditional approach was marked wrong. It was marked wrong. But this is declarative knowledge. This is just a fact. This isn't some higher level thinking. There's nothing to be gained to take this approach on the right. But I think there's something more sinister, and I'm going to get there at the end. Basically, if I can make you major in the minors, you're not going to spend any time on the majors. What's the highest calling? To teach people about Jesus, to make disciples. But if I can get you to take a problem that would take you 3 seconds and make 30 seconds out of it, there's some interesting examples on the internet, and I leave these up here not so much to talk about now, but if you do want the PowerPoint presentation, you can take a look at them. And the internet's littered with these things, these ridiculous ways of trying to do math problems which serve no educator's purpose. None. As I go around and travel and talk in educator circles, I say, is anybody endorsing this? No. Teachers are furious about this nonsense. Oh, but their jobs are tied to it now. So what do you do? We'll talk more about that. After curriculum, what are you going to learn? What are the students going to learn? There's two kinds. There's declarative, procedural. One of the things that Common Core is doing is they're trying to mix those two together. Take a simple fact and make it a complicated process for no purpose. There's pedagogy. How are you going to teach? Behaviorism is, if you think of Pavlov's dog, that's the idea about behaviorism. You want to instill a behavior. You want to make them do. You're going to tell them what to do. You see a phrase there in italics, tabula rasa, which means clean slate. It basically treats the learner, the student, as an empty box. You're just going to fill it up, an empty plate, and you're going to fill it up. Constructivism is the idea of nature, that the learning is within the person. And we're going to draw it out. It changes the role of the instructor from sort of the shoveler to kind of facilitate it, to create an atmosphere where people can learn. As an adult learner, which would you prefer? Just being poured into, or an opportunity to ponder, an opportunity to engage? Discussion questions are constructivism at the very heart. Many of the discussion questions, we struggle because I wonder what the answer is supposed to be. That's not the point. The point is to create a discussion within KI as a fellowship. The quiz questions are sort of behavior, right? It's kind of like you're supposed to get the right answer. Right? What's the answer? See the difference? And as an educator, I'm very key. I follow these things. Which one frustrates you more? My conversations, people get frustrated with the short answer ones because they think, I think it could be something different. Right? But there's no room for that. Discussion questions, of course. Of course there's more room. As long as you're a Berean, Acts 17:11. You got to have a reason. You don't dismiss the other person. Knowledge is transferred from the teacher to the student in behaviorism, constructivism. One of the things that's happening right now is that's getting confused. So we're taking things where the teacher should simply be conveying knowledge on how to subtract 3-digit numbers, and we're trying to create some like internal, you got to internalize it. Gardner did a wonderful set of research. By the way, the title of this is the claim that Common Core is research-based. If that ever comes up in conversation, just ask them for the research. We're smart, we know. If something is research-based, that means, well, Princeton University in 2005 conducted a longitudinal, right? There's an answer to that. What is the research it's based on? Not based on any research. They can make some justification, but there's no basis. There's no research saying Common Core and a standards approach is what is going to win the day. Well, again, I don't want to go through every detail, but it recognizes that different people learn different ways. Well, that's a shock. Well, some guy got a book published, he's famous, but it actually was helpful from a professional point of view, and it's helpful as we consider how to reach out to folks in that go and make disciples we heard about. My daughter does a very ambitious Bible quizzing program, where they have to memorize entire chapters of the Bible and then answer questions competitively. It's pretty remarkable. perfectquizout.com. And if you want to see a pretty good example of different ways to learn in one website, this is it. They allow you to listen to the verses. They allow you to type the verses. They allow you to do flashcards so you can do the verses. It's pretty well done. And as an educator, I respect the way they've designed this tool. So again, I'm not trying to tell you everything about Bible Quiz Out. I taught advanced placement calculus all the years that I taught in public high school. And that, even advanced placement college level mathematics changed over the years. And currently, calculus is taught as a multi-representational approach. Graphically with pictures, numerically with numbers, analytically with formulas, and verbally with sentences. And their AP exams reflect that. So this is it's not a ridiculous thing to try to have more than one way. And if you're taking a constructivist approach, that's inevitable. And we already agreed to some extent, we kind of prefer that. But the notion that we're going to take simple processes and make them complicated in some weird way, I think is simply a way to major in the minors so you're not prepared to deal with the majors. The third part of the stool is assessment. And there's a famous line, when we are chased by a lion, I don't need to run faster than the lion, I only need to run faster than you. You see, there's two kinds of assessment. There's norm reference assessment, where I'm just trying to figure out how do I rank. It's not about how much I achieve, it's just where do I rank. And there's criteria reference assessment, where if you have 100 questions, how many did you get right? At the Olympics, in the swimming, each lane has a swimmer. Well, one of those is the worst swimmer in the pool. Right? He came in last. You stink, man. But he's the 8th best in the world. See, when you're running a race, it's actually an interesting question. If you could set a personal best but come in 4th, that's an interesting question. I can do the best I've ever done, but I lose the race. I think most of us want to win the race. NASCAR, they don't have to run the fastest lap. They just have to cross the finish line first. That's the goal. And if that means they're conserving a little bit of fuel, conserving some tires. One of the things that's happening in education right now is these assessments are getting crossed. Tests designed to measure achievement are being used to compare. By the way, the comparison is very important. In the early 2000s, then Assistant Commissioner of Education in New York State, Kadamus, wrote a paper and basically says, we need people to be the lowest ranking people. Now, why is that? Well, because we have a whole infrastructure to support them. There's an entire part of bureaucracy. Don't ever kid yourself that the goal of education in this country is to get everybody to be a high flyer. It's not the goal. In fact, some might even argue that it goes against the very, not everybody can be tall. Not every, it's not how biometrics work, right? Bell-shaped curve. There was a book written out with great controversy. But the point is this. One of the administrators, one of the political appointees, made the point, actually one of the things he said in a letter was, if we don't have the low flyers, how do we know who the high flyers are? Our top performing students expect to be differentiated so that they can go to the top, most prestigious universities in the land. Do not believe for a second, every teacher is trying to get you to do your best. I'm saying the system is not trying to get everybody to be an A student. It's not the goal. There's other kinds of assessment. I won't get into that right now. Again, it's intended to be, actually what I really hope, I'll get to the end of it, what I really hope is you just want to learn more. You want to hear more. Remember when SATs were rescored? A lot of controversy to that. It's not as controversial as many thought, because SATs were intended to provide a comparison. It's not an achievement test, it's an aptitude test. And what colleges wanted to know is, how do you compare with everybody else? At 500, it used to be a scale of 200. When this happened, it was a scale of 200 to 800. And 500 meant you're in the middle. And for whatever reason, that had slipped. We can debate the reasons, and that's fine. But the point is, the SAT was intended to be a norm-referenced measure. So 500 had to be the middle, and it became misleading. Just one example of a norm, but many people treated it as an accomplishment, an achievement, a measure of how good they were. It's not the purpose of an SAT. So be alert when you hear about some of these scores. In fact, if you can understand that formula, you're better than me. That is a formula that comes out of New York. There's an idea of value-added measure to determine the effectiveness of teachers. How much value did you add to the student? That's the formula that's used. I would have said that if you came into my 6th grade class reading at a 6th grade level, if you went out of my class reading at a 7th grade level, that was probably okay. If you were at a 7.3, I'm probably going to get a card from your parents thanking me. Here's an interesting thing to think about. If somebody comes into your class, your 6th grade class, and they're reading at a 4th grade level, how much value added should they get by the time they're done with your class? In order to accomplish what they need, you got to go 2 years in 1 year. How do you do that? Let me say it this way. Let's imagine 2 patients walked into a doctor's office, and one patient had blood pressure that was 125 over 85, and the doctor wanted to get you to 120 over 80. So over some time, we kind of, that's good. 3 months later, you're down, good. If you walk into that same doctor's office, and it's 200 over 160, he's going to go to much more heroic steps to get you to where you need to get, correct? It's not going to take 3-4 months to kind of bring you down a few points. Is that how education looks to you? Do we find ways of taking kids who have the greatest deficit, if we can even measure that, and we accelerate them and bring them up to the level so that they can then have that equal opportunity that I talked about earlier? These are just fundamental facts in the foundation of the whole conversation. And it's why these things that we see look ridiculous. I worked on a house once where every door stuck, but it wasn't the fault of the door, it was the fault of the what? The foundation on which the house was built. You had to fix the foundation, you fix the doors. Or else you cut, a triangle-shaped thing out of the top of the door to make it close. Put a slide in to remind myself of the time. I want to go through some federal legislation to show you this isn't something that happened the last 2 years, a couple current headlines, and then a what's next. And I got about 15 minutes to do that, okay? The heavy federalization of education, I argue, began with Johnson in the 60s. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and just to cut to the chase, his war on poverty had an education component where he was going to address the poverty and the injustice, and he was going to socially engineer through schools. We can debate that, but that's what it was. Nixon didn't have any marquee legislation. There were a lot of Supreme Court rulings addressing segregation in the early 70s. And he wasn't real big on Title I of Johnson's ESEA, Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Ford, we moved to an Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Special education became a focus in the 70s, mid-70s. Some of you might remember phrases like mainstreaming. The least restrictive classroom environment. My dad was a special ed teacher in the 70s. Carter gave us a Department of Education. Anybody know that, by the way? Late 70s. It's not been around for very long. Department of Education was signed into law on October 17th, and what used to be Health, Education, and Welfare became Health and Human Services. We're familiar with that. And the Education Department. The charter said it could establish policy, administer, and coordinate most federal assistance to education, collect data, enforce federal education laws regarding privacy and civil rights. It does not establish schools or colleges. Our mission is to promote student achievement and prepare for global competitiveness by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access. That's what they say now is their mission. I'm going to come to this later on, but it's important that in that, they cannot create, establish, require a national curriculum. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Reagan gave the Education Consolidation Improvement Act, which was basically an attempt to decrease the federal reach and give the powers back to the states. And you might remember this thing called the Nation at Risk. It wasn't a piece of legislation, it was a report that came out addressing declining scores and suggesting that we need to standardize testing. So the testing vibe has its roots in the 80s. H.W. Bush proposed something called America 2000. You can research it if you're interested. It never became law, but it began a dialogue. And what do you see? The very first bullet under a Republican president was to establish national standards. And so that first came to be part of the conscience, of the dialogue, of the thought. So Reagan tried to decentralize, gives their states. Bush kind of brought it back to Washington. Clinton had Goals 2000. That's one we probably remember. Anybody Goals 2000? That was on the headlines. Called it the Educate America Act. And actually, it was Clinton who tried to push the obligation or the opportunity to create standards to the states. That's kind of interesting. That seems kind of backwards for what you think. This we're all familiar with, No Child Left Behind. All of a sudden, in the last 10 years, this has become a big part of our conversation, at least in the headlines. And again, Bush went back to we need to create standards, have some kind of big assessment plan, and we need accountability. They introduced the term, was an acronym, AYP, which is Annual Yearly Progress. If you think about it, that's the precursor of the VAM, the Value Added Model. Got them for a year, how much progress did you make? We should be able to measure that. So the testing frenzy began about 10 years ago. Race to the top. This was the quietest thing. I couldn't even believe it. That how I would talk to all my friends and say, why, engage anybody on Race to the Top. $4.35 billion in a competitive grant. New York State failed the first time, even though we had a Democratic governor. But, we got it the second time. $700 million came to New York State. It required internationally benchmark standards and assessments, effective teachers, a data system to track student progress. Talk about that a little bit later on. Improve low-performing schools, tie student achievement to teacher evaluation, and create more charter schools. And charter schools have proponents. They have proponents in this room. It's not an indictment, but that was the point of it. And Race to the Top became implemented, or is being implemented. It's kind of like Obamacare, But now to Common Core. George Will wrote this. Now you have that history. The 65 ESA said, nothing in this act shall authorize any federal official to mandate, direct, or control school curriculums. 1970s, no provision of any applicable program shall be construed to authorize any federal agency or official to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over the curriculum, program, or instruction, or select instructional materials of any kind. The 1970s, the Education Department, it forbids it from exercising any discretion, supervision, or control over the curriculum. Remember that first of the three legs of education is, what are we going to teach? The ESEA, as amended, says no education department funds may be used to endorse, approve, or sanction any curriculum. The federal government is powerless. It lacks statutory authority to implement anything. Enter Bill Gates. Enter Common Core. We now have a private foundation called Achieve, Inc. that's pumping billions of dollars that politicians everywhere want. That foundation can implement, well, I don't know, maybe they can't. Let's call them standards. Was standards part of the necessary educational components? No, it's curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. Standards was never, I have a bachelor's and master's in education. We can talk about standards as a component. I mean, you have standards, right? Moral standards, building code standards. But standards is not part of education. But by creating this extra category, we have an effective way to get around the statutory handcuff that Republicans and Democrats alike have maintained on the federal government. Education is at the very heart of it, one of the most local pieces of our life. One-room schoolhouses, always intended to be under local board control. Some states are further along. Texas has a state, right? You read about it all the time in the paper. By the way, that's just a little picture of what you're going to see if Common Core becomes a federal thing. You just have the argument in Washington. How many rely on Washington to take good care of their kids and their education and their eternity? Nobody. It's crazy. But as long as we can keep arguing about what a ridiculous way to add math, we're missing the strategic perspective that has so much impact. The everyman strategic perspective. You don't need to do anything today. You don't have to sign up for anything, and you can follow all these stories. So I was given the opportunity to submit an article to the Personal Update back in February. How many read it? Oh boy, you failed. That's not good. That was a criteria referenced assessment. If you read it, no, I'm just kidding. I'm funning with you. But I'll give you the link if you want to read it. And in it, I said, this educator gives Common Core an F, 4 of them, for the funding, the federalization, the focus, and the fallout. Recently, there's a YouTube video, and it's there. We're not going to look at it. But Bill Gates said this. This is an excerpt from it. We will only know that this effort, Common Core, succeeded when the curriculum and tests are aligned to these standards. $350 million of the stimulus package will create tests aligned to the core. This will unleash a powerful market of service to a uniform base of customers. Is that what you think your kids are when they go to public schools, customers?
No. And so I actually make the argument, the Common Core is the NAFTA for education. I'm not making a political comment. NAFTA standardized how business was done, and it facilitated, it made it easier for business. If we can make the same curriculum, the same tests, the same textbooks. In New York, there was a time when I had, we had 3 courses. New York, for a period of time, went to an unusual way of presenting math. It wasn't a bad way, but I don't want to get into the details of that. But as a teacher, we only had 3 publishing companies that wanted to produce textbooks because they could only sell them in New York. And it was ridiculous, these textbooks. They were terrible. But what business is going to invest R&D money into creating a role? But if I'm doing it for 50 states, and it's aligned with the test people and the curriculum people and the textbook people, whoa. I will support the notion that there is a business efficiency to Common Core, but my kid's more than a customer. 2 videos I think you'll find compelling. I put them in here in case my voice went away. I could show you a video, but God's good. God's good. A lot of prayer went into the fact I can talk, but I want to say something different. I think I missed an F when I wrote that article. How many are familiar with the phrase false flag? I think Common Core is becoming a false flag. And this is why we want to keep track of this strategic perspective. In Bloom was a company that was going to create a database. Remember back when I was talking about Race to the Top, one of the things was to create a way of tracking all the data. In Bloom, one of whose board members is also on the board of Achieve Inc., which is Bill Gates' foundation proposing and supporting Common Core. One database where all educational records went. Now, I'm a teacher. I don't need to know how somebody did in Texas or Alaska. I know how my kids did. I don't have time. I don't know what that would look like. But what a great idea to get every educational record in one place. We know there's energy to get every gun record in one place. We know there's energy to get every medical record in one place. Does that just sound like a good idea? No. How many have heard of In Bloom before this? Nobody. It's just because we're so busy worrying about these other things, which there's a fair conversation to have. How many know that beginning January 1st of 2014, in California, a student can decide on any given day whether they're male or female? And this allows them access depending upon what their decision is. Actually, put your hands up. How many knew that? All right, good. That's important. My 10-year-old daughter. By the way, 13. I read it. I can't find this. I read somewhere 13 other states have adopted similar language. But if an otherwise male student walks in and says, "Today I think I'm a female," they are not only entitled, but they cannot be prevented from using the female restrooms, the female locker rooms, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I envision a time. Write this down. I think there's going to be a time when you will only be allowed to say things like 37% of all women and 27% of all men. Because somebody is going to say, well, that might have been what they were the day the survey was done. I don't know how medical records are going to be handled. We know there are medical differences. There are. I'm glad you're a perceptive group. I really didn't want to have to flesh that one out at all. In New York, in Red Hook, parents were outraged. An anti-bullying program is nothing more than cover for promoting the homosexual agenda. Kids were told had to offer kisses to same-gender students. In fact, in this article, it continues. It says the kid says, "I was already being teased, and I was told I had to do this. And I got teased more. For what purpose?" That's not about bullying. They're being bullied. The kids that want to hold on to some kind of traditional moral value are the ones being bullied. Chicago Public Schools beginning in September 2013. Remember, Chicago was where Obama came from. Rahm Emanuel's there now. Believes that sex education should begin in kindergarten. Oh, we're not going to, not details. But as I read this report, which I think came from, report by Breitbart, I put it in there. If someone touches you and it's uncomfortable, you should tell a trusted adult? They don't even say the parent. It's a crime. What? No, you tell your parent. It's ridiculous. And it continues, as part of this teaching sex ed, beginning in kindergarten, well, there's different kinds of family structures that exist in today's society. This is in our schools. This is happening right now in our schools. Parents can opt out. Can opt out of testing. That's a whole other conversation I don't have time for. I'm getting the two disturbing quotes, and I'll close, nearly ready to close. It was Hitler who said, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." Let's make them gods. Diane Ravitch is how many know the name Diane Ravitch? Very prominent, prolific author back in the 80s. So really writes well against Common Core. Not the kind of, she's not going to be on the websites where we would traffic frequently. But talking to an MIT, what I'm saying, I have my foot as firmly in the very conservative camp as a very liberal camp. So I get lots of intel. Let me write a nation's test, and I care not who writes its songs and poetry. It's the tail wagging the dog. Whoever writes the test, whoever is going to obligate your future of your kid, whether they have a good career, whether they get to a good college. There's more going on here. These are some questions that you can ask, and again, I'll send this to anybody. I'm watching my time here. But I want to, what's next? My goal today was to say, you know what? Education is an awfully good strategic perspective. There's a lot to be learned if we just start connecting the dots. It's the everyman strategic perspective, just as Koinonia Institute is an experience for every man. Anybody can do this. You don't have to have any special training. So if you're interested in this, send to that email address. I don't know how many I'm going to get, but SP 2014 Education. I'll send you a PowerPoint and you get all the links and whatever. But I think that every one of us has a chance, an opportunity to be Berean, Issacharian, or Koinonosian. Sounds like something out of Star Trek. You see, because Jesus is the truth. So if you're educating what's true, if you're teaching truth, you're teaching Jesus. Jesus said, "I'm the Word." Issachar, we got to understand the times. These are not trivial issues that can get, I can't believe that's the way they're teaching math. But I also am eager to add an extra piece of fruit to the strategic perspectives basket of KI. And if there's an opportunity to have a conversation about education, and that somebody from Ohio and somebody from Texas and somebody from Louisiana and somebody from Maryland and somebody from California can say, here's what's happening in my neck of the woods. And our international people, that these things happen internationally. Many international studies. This matters to everybody. There's a powerful force out there that wants our kids. What's the first death in the Bible? Cain and Abel, right? It's kids. Satan wants our kids. And education is a powerful resource from so many perspectives. I hope you're better equipped to make personal choices. I've not tried to say what I propose or what I don't. Although I'm here through the end of the conference, I'd be happy to give you the personal choices, what we've made for our kids. And I hope you're better equipped as you engage in the public debate, because I think this is too important for Christians to not step up and take part in this strategic perspective. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity to present.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, man.
Okay, I want to tell you, this guy, I spent a little bit of time, Chuck and I had a seminar in New York, and this guy took care of us, beyond understanding. He loved us like a real brother, and Chuck and I just enjoyed it so much. But he puts on seminars himself. He drives, he communicates, he makes phone calls. I'm surprised you didn't give him your cell phone number. It's like, text me, email me, and he's serious, he's dedicated. So if you see him, he'll stop and give you whatever information, but I really do appreciate you stopping and giving us this and outlining some things, and it just blows your mind when you think, we need somebody we trust to tell us really what's going on. You'll hear it on the news, this is happening, and you think, oh, I don't know if that really is. But when you hear it from a fellow Christian, a fellow KIer, a fellow serious Bible, teacher and studier, you just think, what is going on with our world? So thank you again. Okay. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
God bless you. And we're going to break now for lunch, 1:40. We're a little bit over, I know, but at 1:40 we're going to try to get our next speaker started. If you have a meal ticket, if you purchased, you want to have that lunch with John Peterson, Dr. Welty, and Chuck's there also. As you go into the dock side, just turn to the left. The doors are open, the tables are set up. They got your name there on the table if you bought the ticket. Otherwise, enjoy. I don't know if it's still raining outside or not, but I'll see you at 1:40 or real close to it, okay? God bless you for being here.